welcome back to Reimagine 2020. I'm Yonah Hochhauser, and I'm glad to be joined by Loretta Joseph, Fintech Advisor to the Innovation Committee on Mauritius, amongst many other titles. Loretta, please, for those who don't know, tell us who you are and how you got into blockchain.
So my name is Loretta Joseph. Thank you for that intro. I started my life as a derivatives trader. So I started trading on a trading floor 3-year futures in 1991 with a piece of paper and a pen and no computer. So I traded, I think, every asset class that we can trade in my life as a derivatives trader. In the early 2000s, I moved to India. I helped set up an Australian bank called Macquarie Bank, which I was the head of India, and then I was the managing director of RBS in India. In 2012, I have a little girl on my own, and she's blonde, and she started to speak Hindi before she spoke English. So I thought I'd go back to Australia, and I thought I'd retire. That sort of lasted about 2 minutes. I got some advisory work at a stock exchange in Australia called the Sydney Stock Exchange, which is a smaller exchange to the ASX, but it's still a fully licensed exchange. And a very good friend of mine is a man called Greg Metcalfe. Greg was the chairman of ASIC, the Australian regulator, the equivalent of the SEC, for 8 years. He was also the chair of IOSCO. So in 2014, he said to me, Loretta, you need to go and have a look at this thing called blockchain because it's going to change the world. So I said, oh, and we have daughters the same age. It's a funny story. So I went and I thought he was talking about Minecraft. So I went on to Minecraft and I'm going, I have no idea how this is going to change the world. And I rang him on the Monday and I said, Greg, what are you on? Like, this is ridiculous. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, I'm talking about blockchain. And so I was like, oh, I was so thankful because I don't think Minecraft was going to change the world. So I read a book called The Blockchain Revolution. And I had this blinding, this moment of, oh my God, this technology is now, you know, the fourth industrial revolution. So I didn't look at it from Bitcoin. I looked at it from building a clearing and settlement system for the exchange using blockchain. Now the problem was in Australia at the time, the ASX, which is the biggest exchange, has the monopoly over clearing and settlement. And, you know, I was a floor trader. I helped build the algorithm systems that moved us from floor trading to computer trading back in the early 2000s. And chess, which the ASX used, was put in the Corporations Act because it was the only thing we had. We didn't have technology. So I went to the Australian government and I said, you can't have laws that are not technology agnostic. They didn't really believe me at the time. So I spoke to Greg again, who was running the regulator, and he said, you can have administrative relief to create a system that rivals it. Henceforth, the Corporation Act got changed. That was the start of a long story. That was my introduction to legal frameworks, changing corporation of a country. That was a good start. And then I joined the Australian Digital Chamber of Commerce as the advisory chair. I looked at Bitcoin because I didn't understand it. I was very confused about what this was. But we wrote the self-regulation for Bitcoin in Australia under the Australian Digital Chamber of Commerce, because at the time I was thinking, you know, I've traded every asset. This was a very hard asset to buy. I was on the exchanges and it was very convoluted, very, very confusing. I think this is what happens when you get sort of new emerging technologies which are built by young people. And they were talking about exchanges, and I'm looking at these things going, they're not exchanges, they're marketplaces because they don't innovate trades, they're just, you know, match buyers and sellers. So that self-regulation of Bitcoin went very well. A number of countries then adopted it. And we went on then in Australia to have the tax taken off Bitcoin transactions. There was a two-way tax. We had that removed in Australia. Australia was very, very progressive. And then well, we were talking to the various bodies, the regulators, the government, the finance ministry, the Primo office, and everybody had a different definition of Bitcoin. Some were calling it a virtual asset. Some were calling it a crypto asset. Some were calling it a cryptocurrency. And I'm going, so what is this thing? So, and nobody could give me one answer. So I did a lot of research and I found in a court of law in the US, Bitcoin was referred to as a commodity. So I thought, okay, this is a digital asset, because virtual currencies, in my view, as the FATF said at the time, virtual means that things don't exist. So I'm like, well, it's not virtual because it exists, but it exists in digital form. And I thought, you know, these cryptocurrencies are just a digital form of money. We can now, with blockchain, digitalize everything. The tokenization of everything, every asset class was what excited me because I was a trader. So the Australian government then took the stance that we would call these new forms of digital assets, and cryptocurrencies is just a subset. So that was a very good place to start. Australia gets a bit convoluted politically because we've had like 9 prime ministers or 7 prime ministers in 7 years. Very hard with legacy systems to push. Fast forward 2017, I was at Davos. I was speaking at an MIT event. I met the Premier of Bermuda, who said to me, I liked what you said, would you like to come and write my legislation about digital assets in Bermuda tomorrow? I said, I don't know who you are, and I certainly don't know where Bermuda is. He said, it's an island in the Atlantic. I said, I'm not going tomorrow. Anyway, long story short, I did. And I sat down with the drafters of law, the Parliament, and we in Bermuda passed the first legislation ever around digital asset business acts and ICOs. Because I'm an equity trader, and security regulators don't understand this ICO phenomena because you don't get equity. So I've looked at it, and I think these models are hybrid. If you ask me, I would tell you that Ethereum is a security. Vitalik may not like me for saying that. I don't think Bitcoin is, but I think you have these very hybrid models of securities that start their life, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to make money. Nothing wrong with having an investor. But, you know, all regulation is to protect consumers and investors. And so, you know, as long as you're not scamming people, you can start your life as a security, and then you might morph into being the next Google 40. I mean, or you try and start your life as Google 40, that may not work, but you then move into a security. So we can't just blanketly call these digital assets one thing, because they're not. And as I said to you before we started talking, the biggest problem with this industry is the language. You know, when you can't get people to agree on what cryptocurrency is, what a digital asset, that's a problem. So if we have a unified law system around the world that the standards are the same and we refer to the same thing, that's a good start. And yeah, so that's how I got into regulation. After I was in Bermuda, I then moved to Mauritius. We did a total recap. There was myself, the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, the Governor of the Central Bank, the Securities Commission Chairman, Lord Magnum Desai, who's a member of the House of Lords and a macroeconomist. He was the chair of the LSE, and Lord Anthony Sir John, who is the attaché of the Queen for Africa and who's a barrister. So we did a whole rejig of the Mauritian law system, and we came up that digital assets were now a new asset class, and we've written a slew of legislation and regulation around that ever since. So that's me, and I advise a number of heads of states. I've also helped write some of the policy you'll see in Eastern Europe. My next thing is central bank digital currencies. I think I have 9 central bank governors on my WhatsApp. We're moving into the 21st century, and the central bank digital currency thing is something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm starting to look at as well, as I look at the tokenization of every asset class that we've seen. So that's me. That's what I do.
First off, I want to thank you for I mean, you're pretty much doing the actual work, you know, and dealing with these heads of states and dealing with these governments and advocating and helping clear up the regulation and clear up the language for the cryptosphere. So I really want to thank you on behalf of all crypto and blockchain lovers. But it's interesting because, like you mentioned, this is a very, very new technology and very tough to understand. So when you're going and you're dealing with these governments and you're building regulations, do you have a feeling that they actually grasp and understand the technology enough to make smart and correct regulation?
It's a great question. So as I said, I was a banker. I was a derivatives trader for 25 years. I come from a very traditional background, but when I first looked at Bitcoin and when I first looked at it in 2014, I spent the next 2 years of my life going to conferences, hanging out in you know, the slums of Delhi, in courtyards in Russian universities, in pinball parlors in New York with the kids that build their systems, than they are. You know, and the stereotype of the kid with the hoodie on that is a bit socially inadequate, I guess, when it comes to talking to people like governments. And it's a very hard thing to put people from the blockchain and crypto space in front of regulators and governments because they scare the living daylights out of them. And they talk about cryptocurrencies being money. And it's in the regulation I've written, I've always said that that digital assets, cryptocurrencies is not legal tender. It's a commodity. And central banks are very, very frightened because this whole concept around coins and Bitcoin caused such confusion, and they're going, do we regulate this? Is it going to take our money supplies? So they don't have a great understanding, but what I always say now to central banks is, this is not your mandate. This is a commodity. Money is different to everybody. I mean, money comes out of barter. Essentially, Bitcoin's a barter system, and the money has evolved over the centuries. We used to barter potatoes and onions, and then we moved to coins. Now we've got pieces of paper with people's heads stamped on it for currency. So the language is very important. And I think if Bitcoin had been called Zen token, nobody would have cared. Had we called ICOs initial business offerings, nobody would have given two hoots. But the fact that they put, coin and exchange into these conversations confuses people, because most regulators are like me, old, we're baby boomers. They don't understand the technology, and they don't. So technologists are not policy writers, and policy writers are not technologists. So it's taken someone like me. I mean, I taught myself to code with my 9-year-old when I was 41. It's taken me. Do you know Robert Kahn? I hope you know Robert. Yeah, so he built the internet. He's the father of the internet. So I rang him up one day and I said, Robert, I don't understand this internet thing. Can you please explain? And he was like, well, who are you? I was like, I'm Loretta from Australia. But Robert has become a very big mentor of mine. He's taught me things that I probably need to know about the internet, but he's taught me the basis of what the internet does and why it does it. And, the peer-to-peer transfer of value, which was never secure. So for me, the whole basis of blockchain and Bitcoin being the first application of that was added on to the internet a protocol layer of security, which most people don't get. So when I speak to governments and central banks, I say, you've got to look at this, because the internet is not safe. Every database we've had in history has been hacked. The only one that hasn't, and the quantum computer guys can argue until they're blue in the face with me, because I'm not going to be alive if they crack it, is the absolute 100% security that we have around this database. So when you start to explain to governments and central banks that that's what you're looking at as well, it's just not this asset, it's the technology behind the asset, which is an infrastructure. I mean, the internet effectively is the infrastructure. I don't know that there's 47 protocol layers on top of that, neither does my daughter, who's 16, but we use it every day. So I think in 5 years, we won't be having these conversations. It will just be a back-end infrastructure that everybody uses and nobody questions. Like, nobody questions what's on your telephone, what the protocol layers are. So it's the same thing, but I try and educate governments and central banks, and the young ones. I mean, I have to say, Anna Brakovic, who runs Serbia, I've been advising, she's 43. The Prime Minister of Mauritius is 40, he's 50, he's my age. David Burt's like 37. There's a lot of young leaders in the world that understand technology. My central bank governor of Mauritius, Habesh, who was my boss at the Financial Services Commission, he's 35 years old. He's the youngest central bank governor ever. He understands this. Timothy Antoine, the central bank governor of the East Caribbean, again, is the second youngest. He understands it. So, and I say now to governments and central banks, it's not what you think. You and I both learned everything we learned in a book. I mean, I used to go to a library at Sydney University and we'd go through little folders and we'd find some chapter of some book. My daughter has this. Everything has changed because of it. And we can't retrofit policies in new emerging technologies that is purpose-built for us and the way that everything has gone since World War II. We have to purpose-build technology regulations around it for the generation of my little girl and the 7 generations after that. That's what we need to do, and we need to build systems that accommodate what they know that we didn't know because we didn't have access to this or the internet.
Well,
so the answer to that, sorry.
Real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, real quick, just to go back to what you were saying, Loretta, like, does it make sense to them when you go back to these individuals and you explain to them how the internet was developed, back in the 60s as a communication kind of layer, and then fast forward, here we are now, and we're trying to, it's insecure, it's not really trustworthy, it wasn't developed for that, payment rails, the internet's not ready for, or not ready, but wasn't developed for payment processing. So does it kind of click when you talk about the history of how we have a lot of students right now, right? And this conference is for our university partners and all of these entrepreneurs.
Okay. The next generation.
And so, and I've been talking about this. I've had, a few interviews the last few days about the evolution of kind of, Web 1.0 with the Department of Defense here in the States. And it was meant for universities to kind of transfer information and all that. And fast forward, and now we're kind of, it went public in the 90s. The protocols, as we don't know how many layers are built on top of it, but it's still not ready. And blockchain is filling those gaps, right? As we go into Web 3.0, I'm assuming it's making sense for the last few years as you telling them, how the infrastructure is now and why blockchain plays a vital role.
So it's interesting on that point. So as I said, Robert Kahn, who built the internet, he sent the first message across an open network to a man called Vincent that said hello. And if you ask Bob, he goes, I didn't mean to build the internet. So I take Bob with me when I have these meetings because he built the internet. Nobody can argue with him. So it's a peer-to-peer system, but the greatest flaw in the internet was that it didn't build in the security protocol layer. You look at cryptography came out of World War II, we know that. So you had cryptography merging with a peer-to-peer transfer of value across an open system, which is the internet, which is now made secure by this new infrastructure called blockchain in a decentralized database manner that adds this protocol layer which brings security to the internet. Now, I often take Bob with me, and nobody can argue with Bob. And Bob actually talked about central bank digital currencies with the Fed in the 1990s. So this is not new stuff. Lord Desai, as I said, is the macroeconomist. He, at the moment, has taught, he was the chair of the LSE. He has 9 central bank governors sitting in office today. So if there's one person that I can speak to with the central bank governor that's going to understand, that's going to listen, if they're going to listen to Lord Desai and they're going to listen to Robert Kahn. Now, ironically, they're both over 80. And the blockchain community on average is under 30 and I'm 51. So it's bringing us all together, but it has to be collaboration because Bob has said to me, when the internet was built, and he didn't mean to build it, he said for the first 10 years he got called into the government and the big interest, they said, shut it down. And he said, well, can't do that, it's an open network. And he said, funnily enough, 10 years after that, they all came back to him and said, how do we buy it? He's like, no, sorry, I can't do that either. So blockchain has definitely filled that security protocol. And I always say to governments and policymakers, if you don't like Bitcoin, that's fine, but I will convince you. But the one thing you need to understand about this database is that it has never been hacked. And it will never be hacked because of the decentralization. And once you break it down for them, they go, oh. So it's such an education, and I think I could spend my life, as I do until COVID, on planes going and explaining this to central bank governors. And I had a very interesting chat back in 2015 because I've been looking at central bank digital currencies since then. There's a really interesting paper MIT have written. I'm happy to share it with anyone who wants it. So I took a bunch of blockchain and Bitcoin coders into the Central Bank of Canada. Well, I don't know if you know Samson, Mao, Joseph, wild work. Anyway, these are hardcore Bitcoin protocol. Anyway, we walk into the central bank and they're all sitting there and they started talking about coding and blah, blah, blah. And I think the central bank governor's eyes rolled back in his head. And I was like, stop, everybody stop for a sec. And I said, so Governor, what is your biggest problem? And he said, well, it's financial stability. And I said, and I was a bond trader in the 90s. So this was one of my biggest problems. We called it something called delivery versus payment. The whole GFC happened because Lehman Brothers, take as an example, were taking delivery of bonds before they're paid for. So the entire financial system crashed on the basis of this DVP. So I looked at these guys and I said, and they went, what's DVP? I said, well, that would be delivery versus payment. And can you build an off-chain system with an on-chain to solve the problem for the central bank? Because that is the biggest problem central banks have. And they said yes. So you've all probably noticed since that day, the Central Bank of Canada, the MAS in Singapore, the Bank of England even, everybody's gone, oh, instantaneous atomically swapping an asset, which effectively Bitcoin does, takes out the post-trade risk. You have no credit risk, you have no default risk, you have all the problems that we've had in financial systems forever and a day. This atomically swapping assets like we do on public blockchain or even sometimes private chains solves that problem, which is the one reason that we have systemic risk. So once you explain it to a central bank in that manner, they go, oh. So that's why central bank digital currencies become really, really hot topics in the last year. I think the pandemic's brought that even more to the forefront. But every central bank that I spoke to 5 years ago told me to go away, and they thought I was bad. Now all the exactly the same people are going, all right, now how do we build this?
Mm-hmm. Now with CBDCs, you know, you're dealing with many different countries. Which countries do you think is going to be the first to it? And will it actually change anything? Will it change anything for the actual end user, or will it just be the further digitization of fiat currency as it is today?
So then I love this question because it's a very interesting one. So when many central bank governors, it's like blockchain was a buzzword, you know, for a while ago. CBDC is a buzzword. Everybody wants a CBDC. And I go, well, why? And they go, because we want one. So well, that's not a good answer. So the issue with the CBDC is there's two forms. There's the retail central bank digital currency and there's a wholesale. At this point in time, I think the bigger central banks, but China's a different boat. China are building a central bank digital currency and they're building it to control. They're not building it to decentralize and to do things better because I always say to people, be very careful what you wish for because cash is the most decentralized thing we actually have. We can all change cash now. All right, it's something that the money launderers and terrorist finances use, but we'll get onto that topic later. But cash is very decentralized. And I can hold my cash in any way I want. I can pay you in cash. The minute we move into central bank digital currencies, that means that we are going to start to give control to states and governments of everything about a person. And do we want to build systems? We have to be very careful when we're building these systems. Do we want to build these systems that are going to affect my daughter's generation and the next? Where they're totally controlled by the state. So I always say to central banks, you can't take cash out. You need an option of a digital currency because people want to use it, it's useful. Retail central bank digital currencies, and they're trialling one in the East Caribbean at the moment, is for a very different reason. Now, the East Caribbean Central Bank needs a digital form of the currency because they're going to have no corresponding banks very soon. So effectively, Governor Timothy Antoine has to bank his people. Now, in mandates of central banks, that's not their job. They look after monetary policy. Central banks should not be giving loans and having retail accounts with people unless it is absolutely necessary. I think in that use case, it's very necessary. In other countries where you have 95% of the population banked, yeah, okay, it's going to make your payments, 1 second faster. It can be a good add-on with all the other things you have. In India, I think they're going to struggle a bit, but we'll get there with the Reserve Bank. Africa, where people are not banked, you know, having now the ability for central banks to start to help bank. You look at the M-Pesa in Kenya. These things are very important. So I think the first step in the CBDCs, other than the East Caribbean, which take as a different use case because the bank has to bank the people, you will see central banks wholesale dealing. So moving cross-border, much faster, much efficient. All the central banks trust each other. I think there's a number of them are looking to collaborate at the moment to move large amounts between each other. My personal opinion is that I think in the Commonwealth countries, which is what I write law in, Africa and India, which have been so long, and even the Caribbean to a point, which have been so stuck with the US dollar, you're going to see these regional hubs with these central banks starting to get trade, move their currencies between each other, which opens trade. I think that's going to be very good for the world. And I think, my honest opinion, I think China is pushing to be the first, but look at Turkey and Russia.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I find it really interesting. You know, there's so much clashing of ideas here, of principles here. When you think about governments and regulators, they move slowly, they move stably. That's their purpose, and they don't want to shake things up too much. And the other end, you have tech and innovation, which is let's steamroll forwards, let's go as fast as we can, and we'll figure it out along the way. Do you feel, is it even, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's the problem. And if you look at the Bitcoin maximalists, they're anarchists that want the libertarians. Okay, in my world, I don't think that works, but I come from a centralized world where I had the GFC. That doesn't work either. There has to be a park in the middle where we work together. Now, the issue is around central bank digital currencies is we have no empirical evidence. So when I speak to central banks about this all the time, I understand because I've traded bond markets. What the hell happens if somebody hacks the system and the inflationary deflation actions you get with a digital currency? Nobody knows. There's no empirical evidence. I don't have 10 years of evidence to show me. So regulators are very slow and steady, but you know, that's not a bad thing, because you need central banks need to understand financial stability. We could, in one broad breath of a problem, blow out, you know, the GDP of a country if we're not careful. So these technological advantages have to be slow and steady. I think security regulators are a bit slow, and I am one. They need to get jiggy with it, because regulation is always slower than innovation. But if we don't start to regulate properly and responsibly, we're going to stifle innovation. And as I always say to policymakers and governments, you ban this or you take it outside mainstream, it's going to happen anyway. These guys will just go around you. So it's better that we bring everybody together and everything is done, you know, properly. And most entrepreneurs, you know, they're good people, but they don't understand AML.
It's 11 hours.
Oh, sorry. They don't understand AML CTF. There's a whole lot of problems that, you know, that older people in the banking system understand, but technology is moving so fast, but we just have to be careful about how we implement it. Because I certainly don't want to ruin, you know, the next generations and take away, you know, the social engineering that will happen if we make them all rely totally on digital currencies that are produced by states.
Well, you know, you make a good point. Historically, whenever there's been innovation that the government doesn't like, they actually were able to ban it or stifle it because it's been centralized. And when we speak about, you know, blockchain, crypto, and now with DeFi, I would love to hear your opinions on DeFi, because DeFi's innovation is complex financial instruments that are happening, and governments cannot regulate it and cannot stop it. What are your thoughts on DeFi?
Oh my gosh. So I put out a really interesting LinkedIn post on this the other day if anyone wants to go and see it. DeFi, I find one of the most scariest but innovative and exciting thing all rolled up into one. So the problem I have with DeFi, so to those who don't know, it's decentralized finance. At the moment, you know, it's like you have money on the internet, you can effectively do all your banking operations yourself, which is DeFi, which is decentralizing finance, taking all the functions that a bank do, borrowing, lending, yada, yada, yada. We can now do DeFi. I have a problem that is built on Ethereum, and there's probably only 100 people that are actually benefiting from these projects. I think the innovation is very good, but it's too early. I think the interoperability between other blockchains needs to come, because I don't think Ethereum scales. And I'm very happy to have this argument with Vitalik or Joe, because I think that's the problem. And if you have a small amount of people, we're going to end up in a situation again like we saw with the ICO bubble. When I started writing ICO regulation, the bubble stopped. Now, it doesn't mean it's not a good way to raise capital, but what I'm seeing with DeFi, and it's awesome, the whole concept is awesome and great, but they're getting around laws again. So once I have a token and I can use it in one platform, and the whole thing of yield farming and liquidity mining, oh good God, I can't wait to start explaining this to regulators. They're going to think but I'm a trader, so, you know, and it's funny because a lot of the young crypto world think that we don't understand anything. I've been trading in liquid assets since 1991. I understand arbitrage. So it's just, you know, if you're a good trader and you've got a gut feel, yes, you're going to make a lot of money out of this, and you can swap one token into another, and you can borrow and lend and, you know, give out your Bitcoin now in a synthetic model. It's only early, and the way that they're issuing governance tokens to get around so the SEC came out and they said a number of years ago, if a project was very decentralized, then it wasn't a security. DeFi comes along and they go, oh, okay, we know how to do this. We're going to give everybody governance tokens as well, so they're all part of the network and they can have voting rights. That's going to be an incredible challenge for regulators. They're not going to get their head around this. So that's I only got my head around the ICOs in 2018. I can't wait to start having to do this in the next 2 months, because you look at the money that's gone into DeFi this year, I mean, it's almost $4 billion. Can't be ignored. But I do have a problem that the hands of that money is in less than 100 people. So it's not as decentralized as people would like to tell you it is. But if we can build and make other blockchains and make them interoperable, just like Lego, on top of this, yes, this is going to take out the traditional banking system, and about time. So all those people, you know, that aren't in control of their money, all these people that are sitting in Africa that nobody will be financially included. I love the concept of this. But again, I think it's going to take a couple of years to iron out the issues. If Vitalik Buterin can change the source code after it was written wrongly, as he did with the DAO. What's he going to do with this? So this hard forking stuff, I think, is going to be an interesting dilemma for the community, the crypto community. But as usual, you guys always solve it, and and just some really interesting, funky stuff's coming out of DeFi. But as I said, I'm a little bit cautious at the moment because I don't think it's as decentralized as we think.
But because it is DeFi, and if it's less decentralized than we think, but still, how could regulators regulate it if there is real no control? What are their options here?
So what are you going to find then? So what do regulators do? Regulators are not meant to stand in the way of innovation. I always get angry when people say, yeah, regulators say that. They are there to protect consumers and investors. Okay, so how do you do this in this new world? All you can do is regulate the on-ramps and the off-ramps and the services and goods that are provided by the system. And so things like companies that are set up to do this, beneficial ownership, that's a big one. As long as you can prove beneficial ownership, this stops the scams. And this is why the FATF, this is why money laundering, terrorism financing has been thrown at cryptocurrency for a long time. And on the ICOs, like, you know, nobody knew who was owning these companies. There was 50 advisors getting money on it. They were reselling it in the secondary market instantaneously. That secondary market liquidity function is why ICOs worked. I think Ethereum has shown that best use case for them is tokens. We'll be able to regulate it, but only in the fact if the people that are doing it are companies and you can prove the beneficial ownership of them. It's going to be difficult, but I think for consumers, you've got to also understand that regulation just helps consumers and investors be protected. We don't want people scammed. People in the industry don't want people scammed. And most people I speak to are very happy to have some form of regulation because they know the legal barriers of what they can do, and they will abide by the law. But if you don't know what the law is and there is no law, things get very grey and muddied. This governance token thing is going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see how DeFi plays out in the next year. But I mean, it's certainly the next thing. I hope it works.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, for some reason, when you go to mainstream, when you go to people who don't really understand cryptocurrencies, for some reason, their first reaction is, isn't that the currency that criminals use, that hackers use, that terrorists use? You know, and maybe it comes from the Silk Road. But now when you speak to governments and central banks, do they still have that fear? Do they still associate Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies with these nefarious actions, with money laundering and with terrorists?
So this is the best question. I've stood up at the FATF and I've answered this. So if I'm a money launderer or a terrorist, I'm not going to use Bitcoin or Ethereum. Cash, I can't trace cash. But if I use Bitcoin or Ethereum, guess what? Boom, you're done. So there's been some it's the best law enforcement tool that we've actually ever seen in history. And that's what people don't understand. They don't studies. How much do you think of Bitcoin is being used for nefarious activities? Some people go, oh, 90%, 100%. It's less than 1%. Cash is what people use. And this is the best law enforcement tool. So I have a couple of stories. Back when I said my friend Greg Makecraft there was a hit put out on a Japanese politician in Bitcoin. All the security agencies of the world got together and with some of the best the Bitcoin guys and the exchanges, and we geo ring fenced the Bitcoin. So not only did they understand where it was moving, they arrested the guy that put the hit out. They took out the guy that had the computer. So in real terms for law enforcement, this is the best tool you've ever seen. There was another really interesting story. Binance were working with one of the security agencies that were leading a project on human trafficking at the UK about 8 months ago. Because they were using Bitcoin, so they were tracing it. So for the first time in history, in 3 hours, there was a security agency swoop across 70 countries, and they arrested 900 people in an hour. It was they said had it not been in cash and been Bitcoin, they would never been able to do it. So it actually shows that we are stopping these terrible things, and none of us want, you know, trafficking of humans, terrorists blowing stuff up. So the actual, the mutability of the Bitcoin and Ethereum, okay, some of the cryptocurrencies are private, and I think we need to make sure that they're pushed out because they're not going to be good if we do want to stop money laundering, terrorism financing. It's actually a very good tool for AML CTF. I mean, this is the best thing we've ever seen. And cash, I will argue, you can walk across the border from India to Pakistan, buy yourself an AK-47 and walk back in, and no one will ever know. If you did it with, and the other thing is, who's going to take Bitcoin? Who's going to give you, a bunch of nuclear weapons for some Bitcoin? Nobody. They want cash. They want fair currency. So, on the on-ramps and the off-ramps, you can control all this.
Mm-hmm. So far we've been speaking about, the top level, speaking about governments, regulators, but, when we see actual people using cryptocurrencies for purchases to actually hold their value, this is in places of political instability. This is in Argentina. This is in places like, Venezuela, places where, like you said, you've been a trader your whole life. You understand the concepts of inflation and hyperinflation. Do you think that the crypto adoption will actually, instead of coming from that top down, from the regulators and the wealthy nations figuring it out, do you think it would rather come from necessity in situations where these local currencies are inflating out of control?
We're about to see the greatest wealth transfer in history. Yes. So you look at it like this. So at the moment, people that always talk about the Bitcoin price. Now, the people that own the assets of the world are the baby boomers. The millennials don't own the assets as yet. But as we've seen with this pandemic, people printing money, what a stupid idea. The government's putting out stimulus packages. Guess who's going to have to pay for that? Next 3 generations. They're going to go, governments, you're kidding, aren't you? We're not paying for that. So you were seeing this big asset transferable into things like Bitcoin, which people can't touch, because people are not going to trust the governments that are putting out all this money. They're just kicking down the trash can of the problems that we've created with this pandemic and how many people are unemployed in the world. And the millennials are not going to take it. So yes, you were seeing, I think you're going to see much more rapid adoption since the pandemic.
Loretta, your Wi-Fi is going in and out. Is your iPod almost out of battery or something, or?
Oh, it should be fine. Let me just see if I can just switch it for you. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'll connect.
You have such wonderful things to say. I want to hear every word of it.
No.
So you could take it from my question of, will the crypto adoption be top down or bottom up, and you were saying how the biggest transfer of wealth is about to happen.
Yeah, so I think that's why you're seeing the price of Bitcoin at $12,000. I don't give advice, but man, every person on the planet should be owning a Bitcoin at this point in time, because it's the only asset that is not going to be devalued or depreciated by the fact that everybody is out there printing money. I mean, I as a trader in 2007-8, living through the GFC, I'm mortified that we didn't learn any lessons. We took no lessons from that. Look where we're sitting. People are printing money, stimulus packages. The millennials are not going to pay for it. They refuse. So, and even fund managers, they're watching their strategies just get absolutely decimated at the moment. So you are seeing, as I said, the biggest move, the wealth transfer that we've ever seen in history. People are moving into cryptocurrencies, and yes, and it's interesting because governments and regulators still don't understand that this thing can be used by a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old. My daughter had crypto kitties, thank God that fell over. But she understands cryptocurrencies. All her friends do. We policymakers, I think sometimes, and governments get a little bit arrogant in the fact that they don't think the people that they're serving understand this. So I think in the next 10 years, I mean, you think about Bitcoin, it got created 10 years ago. My God, or 11 years ago. Satoshi Nakamoto. I've got some theories about Satoshi, but my God. Hey, 10 years we've moved to where we are now. What's going to happen in the next 10 years? You are going to see you're going to see private cryptocurrencies come up like the Libra, which I think is a very bad idea. Give Mark Zuckerberg ability to, he's not very good at privacy. Uber aren't particularly good at their ethics. Roll them all up into a company with PayPal, boom. Central banks are very worried about the competition now, but I think private cryptocurrencies will start to come into play, and they will start to interfere, I think, with central banks, because they're going to really challenge the central bank model that we see today.
Well,
so it's got to be both. I think you get.
Yeah, and I think you highlighted a really interesting point, because historically, Bitcoin lovers and crypto early adopters, we've been yelling at the top of our lungs about this kind of money currency manipulation, the printing of money, endless printing of money by governments, and so we recognize that, hey, inflation, eventually the inflation buck is going to hit somewhere. It keeps getting passed down the line. And so we're prepared. But how about governments? Because governments don't like inflation either. And you see this right now in the globe. The US dollar, since World War II, has been the global currency that global trade is done, even between governments. And recently, governments are starting to realize, hey, we can't trust the US government. They're printing dollars. For the first time in history, the trade between China and Russia, the majority is not done in US dollars. Do you think there comes a point where the world, excluding America, because America right now holds the power, wields tremendous power with the dollar, do you think the world comes together and says, hey, we're sick and tired of any one of us being able to manipulate our own currencies. We're going to band together and make our own anti-inflationary currency on the blockchain?
I think that the days of the US dollar having the dominance has gone. And I think you highlighted very interesting points of I traded US treasuries. So if you look at things like treasuries, the Chinese have always been big holders of treasuries. Deficits have been very good for the US government. Yeah, they to have the dollar control, they were very happy to run deficits for years and years and years, and have the manufacturing go out to the Chinas and the Bangladeshians. And now with this printing of money again in this hyperinflation, I mean, countries that my personal opinion is the big monolithic groups of the world, the OECDs, the FATFs, the IMFs, the World Banks, globalization has just stopped because of the pandemic. What you will be seeing will be regional groups come together. They're going to say, we're not listening to you sitting in your funny office with your manicured arms in Brussels looking down on the rest of the emerging world going, you can't do that, we'll give you policies for better lives. That's rubbish. And the US. So I think the biggest winners out of this is going to be Africa and India, because people miss this in the Western world. They're the youngest populations in the world. They don't have the luxury of having passports and houses and bank accounts even. They adopt this. I mean, you look at the M-Pesa. My very good friend of mine built the M-Pesa, and if you look at the story of the M-Pesa, it's not blockchain, but how Africa adopts and moves so fast because she doesn't have the normal banking rails. I think Africa and India are going to be the powers, and I think the US dollar has seen its day. Interesting too, if you look at the correlation between 10-year bonds, the bonds and the deficits, the Chinese are not buying treasuries at the moment. They've been big holders of treasuries for the last 30 years. The Japanese have stopped as well. So the bigger dynamics of I was a correlation trader. So some of the big correlation moves between assets, between equities and bonds, these correlations are starting to flip like we've never seen before in history. So something is going to happen. And I think you nailed it on the head. I think the US dollar is certainly going to be not the winner in all of this.
Well, one of the beauties of blockchain technology is that's trustless. That you don't have to trust the other side. It's written in code. There is no, not paying up when the guy comes and asks for delivery. And you mentioned that for so long, these countries and these governments have held massive debts of other countries. Do you see them saying, hey, enough, and actually putting bond issuance on blockchains so that, so that you don't have to no longer fight a war to collect, but rather press enter or press a button and you collect?
And so then that's an interesting one. So the World Bank did an atomic swap on a bond with Australia, with one of the Australian banks a couple of years ago, which I was involved in. Great idea. So atomically swapping assets, yes, it takes out all the risks. And bonds, the bond market is right for this, but when they did it on a green bond, there wasn't the demand. I think fast forward from 2017 to what that atomic swap looked like, that it worked on the blockchain, moving it now into bonds in this decade, definitely. I think one of the biggest, that is one of the best use cases I can see in the financial markets is the atomically swapping of assets, which we've never been able to do. I mean, why does a bank or a country hold your equity for 3 days, or you hold your money? Because they're trading at LIBOR, they're trading it, they're making money on the rate of it. That middlemen and those intermediaries that have made money out of friction in systems has just been taken out by blockchain.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it's really so exciting and incredible. And I really can't wait, because people don't realize this is such a new technology. And if you mention I think it's really interesting, because you keep on highlighting the youth. The young understand this technology. The young, we're not set in our ways, with the old times. But hopefully we also don't forget the lessons of that learned from history. And so I wanted to know your thoughts. If looking back, on Black Friday, I think it was 29, a little before my time, and also the economic collapse in 2008. What lessons should blockchain and the crypto sphere be wary of as we transition to these powerful, complex financial instruments that are now available to us? What lessons should we learn from history to be careful to not repeat?
To not have middlemen sitting in the middle of trades. But that's what blockchain does, and the inefficiencies in systems and the frictions in systems have always made people money, whether it be the depression, as I highlighted to you why 2008 happened, the GFC, because people were delivering bonds that they've been paid for. You can't do that on blockchain. Sorry, don't. No. I may not trust you, or you may not trust me, but in the blockchain, I trust that 1 + 1 = 2. Mathematics is the trust. So financial markets are going to get the biggest shake-up that we've seen in a lifetime. And you've also got to remember, this new asset class. I mean, I'm quite excited because I wasn't around for the birth of any other asset class. We have witnessed the birth of a new asset class. I mean, I find that the most exciting thing ever, and I sit in a very privileged position where I get to write, the regulations around this, and I understand it, and I bring it to the forefront. I mean, this is the most exciting thing that we've seen since the internet. If this is the fourth revolution that we've been waiting for, with, I think, the revolution that comes that we saw in the Industrial Revolution. Because you're right, because countries are going to say, sod off. The Africans, we're sick of being told what we can do, people won't trade with us. So I think these trade blocks that you're now starting to see develop in Africa and India, the Caribbean. I'm a big advocate of the Commonwealth, because I write Commonwealth law. 53 countries belong to the Commonwealth. To write regulation for the FSC or Canada, you've got 28 regulators, everybody's got a piece of the pie, different law systems. Europe's like a big jar of spaghetti. I now have written the template for regulations across the Commonwealth, which is 53 countries that can implement my regulation tomorrow. Wow.
And I hope that you're putting in very pro crypto regulations. Make sure taxes are really low, and make sure that we can do whatever we want.
Well, it's funny actually, because it was when I first, I got cryptocurrency a long time ago, because I do a lot of advising of firms. Like, I help them with their business models. I sit on a couple of venture firms as consultants. When I first got some Bitcoin, I went to my tax department in Australia. I said, so what do I do with this? And they went, and then this is why I said, what is it? And they went, we don't know. I said, all right, well, that's why I had to go to the government and say it's a digital asset. I said, all right, but what do I put on my tax return? And I said, you have to tell me, because you'll jail me and I'm not letting you do. So we brought that to the forefront. And a digital asset, you only have to, if you keep it in the world of digital asset, that's fine. But in Australia, once you convert it back into fiat, you've got to pay tax on it. That's fair. I mean,
is it a capital gains tax? How is it taxed?
No, it's taxed as as a commodity. So it's just, you have capital gains as you would like a commodity, but there was a double tax on it. There was a double service to the goods tax. So if you got into it, you had to pay that on the other side. So we had that removed first. But just trying to sort of basket it, like, what do you put on your tax return? Oh, I own Bitcoin. And I said to tax guys, you've got to also look at this, because with things like smart contracts, efficient taxes, people don't like paying taxes, but if the tax man takes us when I give you a transaction to give it to me instantaneously, we don't notice it, and everybody's happy. So I think low thresholds. I think people are looking how to tax it. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. But I think if you look at it as a commodity tax is much better than other forms of tax.
Mm-hmm. And right now, I mean, as it sits, there are some countries that are more clear on it, and other countries who really have it's just a free for all. Right now, I'm sitting in Israel, and it is. I have every single person I've asked, including tax experts, still have no idea how to handle it. Do you foresee that being a barrier to mass adoption? This unclarity, not just on the technology, but on taxation and regulation for it?
No, I think we're starting to see, I mean, certainly I've been working with a lot of people around the world on tax and stuff. There's been really interesting models coming up for digital assets. Now, I think it's just going to come, but I don't think the tax man can see it as something that he's going to, tax lawyers shouldn't be writing regulation, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the tax bit, I think if you have these smart contracts and stuff and we can have tax taken out, everybody wins. Because nobody likes paying tax at the end. The tax man doesn't like chasing you. I mean, I think there'll be beneficial things that come out of some of the tax policies that are coming out of, say, the European Union. The Germans have been very, very good on it. Obviously, Australia, Canada, some of these jurisdictions that are accepting it. What I would like to see, and one reason I've been doing it in Commonwealth countries writing regulation. So you look at Bermuda. Bermuda sort of, for me, covers off North America, Canada. Mauritius, well, they were a little island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. A lot of money flows through Mauritius. Our biggest, not tourism, our biggest money maker is financial services. We had an oil spill last week, so that wasn't very fun. And so that covers off India and Africa. Malta has regulation in Europe. So what I would like to see is that everybody has the same regulations, and we don't have treaties of tax anymore. We have treaties of technology. And that way, I envisage it for the people in the industry, because at the moment, if you're a blockchain company and you go, oh, I'm going to go somewhere there's no regulation, and you pop off to Panama or Cyprus, wherever you go, your biggest problem is trying to scale back into a mature market. So if you come to a jurisdiction in which we lay out the law, you can't do this, you can do that. The beauty about Malta is you get the European Union, and the beauty about Mauritius is you get Africa and India. Now, what does every company in tech need? You need adoption, you need customers. Boom. So I see these three pockets of the world, the Caribbean, Africa and India, as being, this is where the rise comes. Not in Europe, not in the US. The legacy systems have proven that they will take years to catch up. But I write regulation in places where we don't have legacy systems. They go, oh, we need to do something, because look at Mauritius. We've got financial services. We had a very bad oil spill last week. It was an economic and environmental disaster. We can't go and start manufacturing cars. So you think of all those places, those sectors are gone. You've got to be innovative. You've got to attract capital. And if the Bermuda experience in Malta is anything to go on, tech companies don't care where they go. You're agnostic because you've global markets, but you will go somewhere where the law gives you clarity, where you're not going to be arrested one day for doing something you didn't know you were doing wrong, and where you can scale and use the attached markets to build the business.
Mm-hmm. And you keep on describing it as a commodity, and that's essentially how it is used today. But what happens, or will we ever see the point where, hey, this is you get to choose to be paid. I want to be paid either in the local fiat or in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. Will it at that point then be taxed as just an income tax? This is my income. Let me pay my regular income tax on it as well?
I mean, well, it's an interesting thing because everybody has a different definition of money. This is the problem. It's like, as I said, money comes out of barter. But yeah, I mean, I think if you should be able to be paid whatever you want. I think using it as a payment, Bitcoin was not built. So some of the other cryptos were, but Bitcoin wasn't built to be a payment system. It's slow, it's clunky. It was built for one thing, to be secure, to move assets securely. So it wasn't meant to be a payment system. I go and buy coffee with it. So then I think, you get Ethereum come along, you got Ripple come along. Some of these protocols, their scalability and interoperability is still going to be a problem. But yes, I mean, why can't you be paid in Bitcoin? Why can't I take some of my money in cash? Why can't I take some of my money in gold? I mean, I can be paid in gold. There's nothing in any legislation that says that I can't be paid in a gold bar.
Right. And if you get paid a gold bar, are you paying, you're not paying capital gains, you're paying income tax.
You pay income tax.
Exactly. All right. Well, Adam, do you have anything to ask Loretta?
You know, we have a few discussions on a lot of, you know, these use cases and dealing with regulators. What about sandboxes? I know some countries are, you know, are using these sandboxes to kind of work together. And what's your take on that? And I know you work obviously with various countries here. So what's going on there?
So I built the sandbox in Mauritius. So it's a funny one. So we actually have a regulatory sandbox. We've got 27 companies in it. Sandboxes are useful as long as you have lots of people in them. And so what we do in Mauritius, we're a bit different because I work for the security regulator. So we regulate the non-banks. The Bank of Mauritius regulates the banks. So at the moment, we've got 27 companies in the sandbox. They come in and they show us their business model. And so the central bank governor comes, the deputy governor, the Financial Services Commission chair. We have a chair, which is Lord Anthony St. John. The Financial Intelligence Unit guys come, the tax guys come, the Attorney General comes. It's a and most sandboxes don't have that. So we all sit together, look at the company and go, all right, who should regulate that? And so the Bank of Mauritius or the securities, or maybe nobody needs to regulate it. And we give them a 12 months grace period and we look at what they do. And then if it works, they can move in to be fully licensed. It works very well in Mauritius. Some of the other models I don't think work so well because nobody's in them. So the incentives to get into the sandbox aren't great in some other countries. So there's no point being in a sandbox if you're on your own. The Mauritian one, a lot of people have actually copied ours because it's very good. We also have talking about tax, we also have an initiative whereas if you build something in Mauritius that is innovative, you get a tax holiday. That's very significant.
And to touch on education, I mean, you're educating, you know, various people here across the
and university students. I go to unis all the time.
And so, what about at the education level? Whether that's universities, whether that's government programs, initiatives, you know, what's the thought on that? On educating either retail, you know, enterprises, governments. Working with you, do you guys work with universities as well?
Yes, of course. So I mean, every country that I work in, I have given multiple presentations to university students because I think this is important because they get it. They don't understand some of the intricacies of it, but you need the lawyers, the accountants, the people of the future, because if you know the people coming out of university now, the computer scientists, having one characteristic you're good at. Like if you're an accountant, you're good at accounting, your law. That's not going to work. In the future, you're going to have to be able to code. All these different industries are going to have kids that code. Governments are going to have to understand kids that code. You're going to have to have the ability to be able to hack systems so you understand it. University is not just one degree now that you get. You need to understand coding, and I don't care what faculty that is. All kids need to understand how to code.
And I know we're coming up here on, you know, concluding the discussion, which has been great. What about technology in the sense of, we've talked about Ethereum and we're talking about Bitcoin. We brought up Ripple a little bit. Is the technology there from the government standpoint? Do they even care about the tech? Like, is it up to par? Is the security there? How in depth are they looking at the tech outside of the use case? And kind of, you know, how to implement this stuff? Is the technology up to par? Obviously, it's going to continue innovating, but where we're at today, does it make sense for them to integrate what we have available?
So I think, so if you look in Bermuda, there's a company, Shift Networks, that is building the ID system for Bermuda. Now, granted, Bermuda is a country of 60,000 people, but the Estonians tried it, but it didn't work because they centralised it, everyone got hacked. I think, to date, what we've seen with Ethereum and some of these other protocols is just their pilot. But I think Ethereum has cracked it with the tokens. I think they've got their best use case is to use tokens and to do ICOs, which are paid in Ether. I think that's their use case. I think other blockchains are starting to develop because you have to be institution ready. Like governments are governments, for God's sake. Like we can't be just throwing some, some startup in and going, oh, just go and do the KYC, AML for, the databases between the police, the regulator, and the Ministry of Finance. That's a very stupid thing to do because we have no track record, the good God. But I think you are starting to see things like some of the voting companies that are doing voting on the blockchain. Supply chain is my big thing, provenance of goods. And if the pandemic has pushed us to work out how the hell to solve this really quickly, please God do it. But I think governments are looking to use blockchain to make their services more efficient. And I think as long as the use case is small and the pilot's small and the pilot works, you see the scalability and the interoperability, things will get better. But right where we sit at the moment, and why did Facebook launch Libra? Because what is the use case that is working? Money, the tokenization of money. That is the one and only thing that's making people money. That's why you still got to look at Bitcoin for doing what Bitcoin does. These things will evolve, and I think in the next 5 years you will start to get government grade, institution grade blockchains that are stable enough to be able to hold and to have the thousands of registers, companies and registrars, companies, transactions. Because the last thing we want is governments to be falling over because somebody.
And are we talking about public chains and private chains, or are we just talking about public or private, or?
So I think you're going to see a hybrid. I think public blockchains like Bitcoin, it's very inefficient. What am I going to go and do? Put the company of registrars, companies in Mauritius on public blockchain? No, it's a stupid idea. So it's a trade-off really. So it depends how you want to view security. So it's security and privacy. They're a trade-off. If you want to be so secure nobody can break you, go and use a public blockchain, but that's going to mean that you're going to have a lot of people on it. It's very public. Private blockchains for things like banks, governments that don't want to put all their information out there are going to be important because you will have instances where, I always say this to people, so where is the blockchain the most important? When you have collaborators that are competitors in a network that need to share information but don't trust each other. So those private blockchains, I think, are important in situations like that, like government to government, but they will use the security protocol, say, of the Lightning Network or the Bitcoin network. So I think what you will see in the next 5 years, I hope I'm right, is this morphing of the protocols. Some will go, some will stay. The hardened ones will join with others, and we will have this very robust infrastructure, which I talked about before.
And last question, I haven't heard too much. Is there any communication with these protocols and governments? Is there any, do you guys bring in?
Yes, of course. So every country I've worked in, the first OECD blockchain policy conference I did 2 years ago, I bought everybody. And the black hat that hacked the DAO got up and cracked the guy from Ethereum. It was awesome. So I go into a government and I do a lot of work with Joseph Weinberg, who's a very good friend of mine. He runs Shift. He's excellent because he looks at the governments with doughy eyes and they think that he's good, but he explains things in a very simple term. I always take people from the community because I have this belief that the internet taught us one thing: walled garden approaches don't work. As I said, policy writers are not technologists, and technologists are not policy writers. Joseph came to Bermuda with me. He sat down for hours with a bunch of drafters who are all like in their 70s with 2G phones, explaining to them what Bitcoin was, explaining to them. So I always take the industry with me. It's because we have to do it together. And the libertarians will say, no, we don't work with governments. Come on, guys. There has to be a middle ground if we want this to work, because the internet took much longer to get up and running because there was no middle ground. But we've learned the lessons from that. So I have this hashtag, collaboration is the new survival, and we all have to do this together from the same side to make sure that the regulations that we're writing are purpose-built for the next generations.
Mm-hmm. Well, Loretta, I really thank you so much. You are our woman on the inside. You're fighting the fight on the front lines with the regulators. Keep on doing pro-crypto regulation. I'm sure I speak for Adam and all our viewers when I say that. Loretta Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure you're very busy. And for all our viewers at home, for Reimagine 2020, I'm Yonah. That's Adam. Thanks for watching.